All right, so here we are. This is the second lecture video for Heidegger's Origin of the Work of Art. In the last video, we didn't cover as much ground as I thought I did. Surprise, surprise. Took a little bit longer than I had imagined, but we mainly covered just kind of preparatory remarks and some of the issues and problems, and the proper questions, I guess, to ask as far as what we need to do, what we need to look for when we investigate what a work of art is and where it comes from, right? What the origin of a work of art is. So in this video, in the last one, we talked a lot about what it means to be a thing, and we hadn't really get much to it. But he said we have to separate the work of art. When we look at a work of art, or really any work for Heidegger, we have to separate its work, the aspect of it as an object of work, its workliness, and its thingliness, right? And so we have to start with thingness in general, and then once we understand thingness in general, we can come back to the work of art and appreciate it, right? So he's going to get into thingness. So this video, even though this is a course on philosophy of art, there's not going to be much art in the second lecture, but it's really important. You can't really skip it. You're going to have to sort of wait. Next video, we're going to, even though we're kind of jumping off from where we're going to leave at the end of this one, and we're going to go through three different interpretations that Heidegger is going to sort of unpack and critique and show sort of the shortcomings of them all. But three different interpretations of a thing, traditional interpretations throughout Western philosophy. And at the end of the video, when we wrap up the end of the third interpretation of a thing, we'll start to talk about sort of this idea of equipment. That will come towards the end, and that will indirectly, although it seems kind of like Heidegger had this planned all along, indirectly lead us into art, right? So it's all going to pay off in the end, I assure you. Okay, so let's go and start off here. We're going to talk about the three interpretations of the thing according to Heidegger. And again, he's drawing from the Western tradition of philosophy. And according to the first interpretation, the thing is just that around which properties gather. So he writes, this block of granite, for example, is a mere thing. It is hard, heavy, extended, bulky, shapeless, rough, colored, partly dull, partly shiny. We can take note of all these features in the stone. Thus, we acknowledge its characteristics. But still, the traits signify something proper to the stone itself. They are its properties. The thing has them. The thing? What are we thinking of when we now have the thing in mind? Obviously, a thing is not merely an aggregate of traits, nor an accumulation of properties by which that aggregate arises. A thing, as everyone thinks he knows, is that around which the properties have assembled. We speak in this connection of the core of things. The characteristics, however, are called, and he's using the Greek phrase, tasumka bebekokta, that which has always turned up already along with the given core and occurs along with it. Okay, so I'm going to skip these next couple slides here. He's going to talk about, he talks a bit about, and this is, for Heideggerians, probably most Heideggerians are going to watch this video. It's a little too basic for them. If you're a Heidegger scholar, you probably laugh at this. This video is kind of a dumbed down version, but, anyway, this is an intro class. Cut me some slack. But anyways, I'm going to skip these next slides. They're in the handout if you want to read them. Heidegger focuses on, in a lot of his work, on how the meaning of concepts and words and language are tied together. That's going to come up. We're going to have to get into some of that towards the end of this series. But this stuff we can skip over, right? He's going to talk about how this concept of the drawing together, right? This tasum or whatever, I can't pronounce it correctly. Once it gets Latinized by the medieval scholars, it starts to sort of lose a bit of its original meaning, right? And sort of, it doesn't correspond to the actual experience of the Greek that was coining that phrase. So the Greek was not experiencing being the way the Roman scholar was. So when they translated the words from the Greek into Latin, there was something that was lost. And that's inevitable, right? I mean, Heidegger is going to say, you know, he himself is probably making these same mistakes, and 20, 30, 40, 100 years from now, the human race can look back on Heidegger and see where he has these misinterpretations or misreadings and such, right? It's just inevitable. You know, what is it? Hindsight 2020 is the old expression. But anyways, like really quick, right? This first interpretation of the thing is that around which properties gather, right? There's this thing, you know, whether it's a rock or, like he's using the example of the granite. You know, the granite has a shape, it has a color, it has, you know, all these are properties that attach to it, right? So that's the thing, okay? That's the underlying substance. According to current opinion, this definition of the thingness of the thing as the substance with its accidents seems to correspond to our natural outlook on things. No wonder that the current attitude towards things, our way of addressing ourselves to things and speaking about them, has adapted itself to this common view of the thing. A simple propositional statement consists of the subject and the predicate, right? A substance with accidents, right? In which the thing's traits are stated of it. And who would have the temerity to assail these simple fundamental relations between thing and statement, between sentence structure and thing structure? Well, obviously Heidegger's going to do that here in a minute. You can probably see this coming. So, but you know, again, he's going to ask the question: does this, the way we express ourselves in language, right? He's going to say this sort of subject predicate structure of our language, the way it's presented, presents a way of seeing things, a way of seeing the world, a way of seeing beings, as Heidegger might put it, right? But does this really mirror the way things are, right? He asked, does this structure of the sentence, this subject predicate sentence, really mirror the structure of the thing? Or is this some sort of projection? Are we projecting something onto it? So he thinks that this traditional concept doesn't comprehend, right, surprise to the essence of a thing. On the contrary, he thinks it attacks it. Right? It says, actually, the sentence structure does not provide the standard for the pattern of the thing structure, nor is the latter simply mirrored in the former. Both sentence and thing structure derive in their typical form and their possible mutual relationship from a common and more original source. Our reliance on the current interpretation of the thing is only seemingly well-founded. But in addition, this thing concept, the thing as bearer of characteristics, holds not only of the mere thing in the strict sense, but also of any being whatsoever. Hence, it cannot be used to set apart thingly beings from non-thingly beings. Okay, so we talked about this in the previous video, right? The first lecture on Heidegger here, on the origin of the work of art. We hesitate to call the deer in the field a thing, or a human being a thing, or God a thing, right? We hesitate to do this. So if we take the thing in this traditional conception of it, that fails to distinguish those two, because we can talk about God in a sentence, whether you believe in God or not. You can write a sentence, a subject predicate sentence: God exists, God doesn't exist, right? God is beautiful, God is great, God is not great, whatever you want to say, blasphemous, non-blasphemous, believing, non-believing. For Heidegger, that subject predicate distinction doesn't separate what he calls thingly beings from non-thingly beings. So I'm skipping this next quote. It's a bit of a digression and sort of, maybe more extrapolation, but I'm leaving it all in the handout in the PowerPoint presentation, which will be linked below, okay, in the comments section. So for Heidegger, right, again, if we're going to avoid this attack on what it is, the essence of the thing, right, which sees it in this terms of this subject predicate structure, if we're going to do that, right, if we're going to avoid that assault, he suggests that we grant to the thing what he calls a free field in which it can display its thingness directly. Right? I warned you in the first video. He has a very peculiar way of expressing himself. You'll have to bear with us, right? So let's read what he says here, and if we can get something out of this. What does he mean by granting a free field, right, in which the thing can display its thingness? Can such an assault perhaps be avoided, and how? Only certainly by granting the thing, as it were, a free field to display its thingly character directly. Everything that might interpose itself between the thing and us in apprehending and taking and talking about it must first be set aside. Only then do we yield ourselves to the undisguised presence of the thing. We do not need first to call or arrange the situation in which we let things encounter us without mediation. The situation always prevails. Hence, the concept later becomes a commonplace according to which a thing is nothing but the unity of a manifold of what is given in the senses. Whether this unity is conceived as a sum or as a totality or as form alters nothing in the standard character of this thing concept. So now we're getting a new, he's segging into this second. I said there were three, right? We're going to go through three interpretations of a thing. He's going to, show us why they're all somehow failing. They all lack in some sense. Ultimately, the third interpretation he's going to say is the best and offers a good clue, but all of them are lacking. They're not going to get to this distinction between thingly beings, non-thingly beings, what is the work being of an object versus the thing being, all these kind of things, okay? But the second concept, right, we're trying to avoid this assault. So what do? To try to unpack this quote here, we look for things in sort of the undisguised presence. We look at the situation itself without mediation, without our sort of thinking about it. And this is what modern philosophy tends to do. When I say modern philosophy, I'm referring to post-Descartes, right? Post-Copernicus, scientific revolution and after, okay? We start to look at subjective experience, what he talks about in earlier videos as aesthetic experience. And then we see, what we see as the thing is nothing but, as he puts it here, the unity of a manifold. That's very Kantian speak. If you read Kant, he talks about the self as the manifold. Sorry, the unity of apperception. It takes the manifold of all of our senses and experience and feelings, and it organizes them into some unified experience, some unified perception or apperception, as he puts it. So this is a different interpretation of thing. The thing is an organization of all the raw data and all the raw senses of experience, okay? So this can be conceived as a sum. That's kind of I guess you could argue that's kind of the analytic philosopher's approach to this approach to the thing. Or the empiricist, like a David Hume, it's just a sum. It's all your experiences added up together, conceptualized, and sort of reduced to whatever. Maybe that's kind of how maybe computer programmers, when they were first developing AI, they thought of consciousness as this. It's all ones and zeros. You walk into a room, it's like you're the Terminator robot, and you're just summing up the totality of everything. The size of the room, all the objects in the room, their proportions, their size, their shape, and then you're sort of like summing it all up and then coming out with some output of understanding, right? Or a totality. That's more of the Kantian. It all coheres together in this totality of experience. Form, I'm not sure, he might be alluding to Plato there, or perhaps Leibniz or something. But for him, though, even this interpretation, although it doesn't try to, sort of slice the thing up into this subject-predicate divide, we see what's wrong with that already, but this misses out on something too, okay? So there's this concept of thingness. It shifts from the first interpretation, the more, I guess, the sort of Platonic Greek interpretation, to become a unity of sensory manifold, right? Like for example, in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. And again, he thinks that this is also insufficient because it contradicts our actual experience of things. It's ultimately, his gripe seems to be it's too abstract. So he writes, this interpretation of the thingness of the thing is as correct and demonstrable in every case as the previous one. So it's not that you can't apply this to every situation, just like the substance with predicates, substance with accidents. You can apply this to just everything, okay? But you're losing out on something. You're leaving out some element, right? So again, it is demonstrable in every case as the previous one. This already suffices to cast doubt on its truth, right? It's too general. It's too applicable, right? If we consider, moreover, what we're searching for, the thingly character of the thing, then this thing concept again leaves us at a loss. So we still haven't got to the thingly character of the thing with this interpretation. And why not? Why not? What's his argument for this? He says, well, we never really first perceive a throng of sensations, for example, tones and noises, in the appearance of things, as this thing concept alleges. Rather, we hear the storm whistling in the chimney. We hear the three-motored plane. We hear the Mercedes in immediate distinction from the Volkswagen. Much closer to us than all sensations are the things themselves. We hear the doors shut in the house and never hear acoustical sensations or even mere sounds. In order to hear a bare sound, we have to listen away from things, to divert our ear from them. In other words, listen abstractly. So this sort of Kantian approach, it also gets things wrong. It mischaracterizes the way we actually experience things, right? The examples he uses, right? The storm whistling through our chimney, right? I've just got a picture here of it whistling through the trees, right? This is something that strikes us, right? That jumps out at us in experience. It's not like we're like this Terminator robot that is completely indifferent and unemotionally moved by what we're seeing or completely unaffected by it. And we're just analyzing it like some logical data, statistician. And then we come up with our result, right? This is something that immediately jumps out at us, okay? So this interpretation mischaracterizes what we mean or what we experience as the thingness of the thing. And in that regard, it is also faulty. It's also an attack, right? It's also a misinterpretation, okay? So in the thing concept just mentioned, there's not so much an assault upon the thing as rather an inordinate attempt to bring it into the greatest possible proximity to us. But a thing never reaches that position as long as we assign it its thingly feature, what is perceived by the senses. Whereas the first interpretation keeps the thing at arm's length from us, as it were, and sets it too far off, the second presses it too hard upon us. In both interpretations, the thing vanishes. Okay. So in the first interpretation, he says that we keep it at arm's length. Okay. The first interpretation, remember, it's this object, this substance with accidents, with qualities. The granite has a shape, it has a color, it has a weight. All those are properties that are hoisted upon its substance, its being. It's just there, right? It's brute presence. Okay, and then the qualities are accidents. Okay, that one keeps it at arm's length, but this one presses it too hard upon us. It makes it so that it almost just disappears in the flow of experience. And for him, on both interpretations, we're losing something about the thingness of the thing. So he says it's therefore necessary to avoid the exaggerations of both. The thing itself must be allowed to remain in its self-containment. It must be accepted in its own constancy. This third interpretation seems to do this, which is just as old as the first two. So this third interpretation, and I think he doesn't mention Aristotle, But this is obviously Aristotle here, right? Aristotle's metaphysics is often referred to as hylomorphism, and he mentions these Greek words, hule and morphe, or however you say these, right? Hule, morphe, eidos. So this is very Aristotelian. And out of all the three interpretations, this one he's going to say is probably the most fruitful, yet even it suffers its own shortcomings. So that which gives things their constancy and pith, but is also at the same time the source of their particular mode of sensuous pressure, colored, resonant, hard, massive, is the matter in things. In this analysis, the thing as matter, hule, form, morphe, is already coposited. So this is, again, very Aristotelian. Plato tries to separate form from matter, right? For him, form is what remains when you take away all these accidents. And for Plato, the accidents are simply what Heidegger's calling the particular mode of sensuous pressure, colored, resonant, hard, massive. For my students at U of H, you might remember back to the passage we read from the Symposium, where Plato talks about the beautiful. And the beautiful itself, it's not in anything. It's not hard or soft or cold or light or dark. You know, you might talk about it in those ways metaphorically, but the beautiful itself is not really in anything physical. So this is a very this is anti-Platonic. You know, for Aristotle, you cannot separate matter from form. They always come together, right? So in this analysis of the thing as matter, form is already coposited. What is constant in a thing, its consistency, lies in the fact that matter stands together with a form. The thing is formed matter. This interpretation appeals to the immediate view with which the thing solicits us by its looks, eidos. In this synthesis of matter and form, a thing concept has finally been found which applies equally to things of nature and to use objects. So even a clump of dirt is, you know, has matter and form, right? It's made of dirt and it has form, right? In this case, we're just talking about shape. You know, it has, you know, a clump of dirt might be shaped kind of square-like or just kind of randomly or clumpily or whatever. And so this also applies to what he calls use objects. That's more Heidegger speak, a use object, like a spoon or a fork, something that I made, but I use it for something. It's also an object and it's formed matter, okay? So this third interpretation works and applies to all these objects. And for him, he says it puts us in a position to answer the question concerning the thingly element in the work of art. So now we can use this concept and we can extract the thingly element from the workly element. We can try to, at least. I think he's going to say ultimately this kind of still fails in a certain sense. So the thingly element is manifestly the matter of which it consists. Matter is the substrate and the field for the artist's formative action. Okay, so the matter is the thingly aspect, and the formative action of the artist is what makes it a work. Okay. The distinction of matter and form is the conceptual schema which is used in the greatest varieties of ways, quite generally for all art theory and aesthetics. This incontestable fact, however, proves neither that the distinction of matter and form is adequately founded, nor that it belongs originally to the domain of art and the artwork. Form and content are the most hackneyed concepts under which anything and everything may be subsumed. If form is correlated with the rational and matter with the irrational, if the rational is taken to be the logical and the irrational the illogical, if in addition the subject-object relation is coupled with the conceptual pair of form and matter, then representation has at its command a conceptual machinery that nothing is capable of withstanding, right? So this third interpretation, right? Ultimately, what he's saying here, if it correlates form with the rational, that's the rational aspect, matter with the irrational, the brute stuff, from which things are made, right? And it also couples what's rational with what's logical and what's irrational with what's illogical. And on top of this, we see form and matter as sort of a parallel or mirror to the subject object. He says that this sort of conceptual framework, this sort of as conceptual mechanism, is something that nothing can resist, right? That all things can be interpreted under this rubric. Does that mean it's good though? Not necessarily for Heidegger, right? In fact, in its own way, this is another assault on the thingness of the thing, right? He ponders whether, and he also asks, where does this come from? Where does this matter form schema have its origin? Does it have it in art, in the work of art? Is that where Aristotle is getting this when he's thinking of formed matter, right? The clay is just a lump of clay. It has a form of a lump. When I take the clay and I form it into a brick, now it has a new form, but the matter remains the same, right? It's achieved a new potential, and the brick, again, can be formed into part of a wall, et cetera, et cetera. This all fits very nicely into Aristotle's metaphysics, right? And we can apply this so universally, as Heidegger puts it, it's a conceptual mechanism that nothing can resist. But where did this have its origin? Where did this conception come from? He thinks there's two alternatives. Either we actually got this from the thingness of the thing. So this is from an experience of the thing itself, which is what he's trying to get at, right? We're trying to figure out the thingness of the thing. Or it's really just a look at the work character of the artwork. Okay, and in that sense, it misinterprets the thing as work, and that's the distinction that needs to be made. And Heidegger is going to try to get to it. He says the self-contained block of granite is something material in a definite, if unshapely form. Form means here the distribution and arrangement of material parts in spatial locations, resulting in a particular shape, namely that of a block, right? So if you look at this block of granite I have pictured here, its form, when we talk about form here, it's just talking about the way it's arranged, right? It's in a sense, it is just a mere thing. It's just a hunk of granite. It needs to be chipped away and made into a sink to be used, right, in some rich person's house, right? Or it needs to be turned into a sculpture, or whatever it is. But when we talk about form here, its matter is the granite, matter it's made of, and form is just its shape, namely in this case a block. But he says a jug, an axe, a shoe are also matter occurring in a form. Form as shape is not the consequence here of a prior distribution of the matter. The form, on the contrary, determines the arrangement of the matter, right? So this is very Aristotelian, okay? You might review our lectures on Aristotle if you remember we talking about, what's the difference between a work of art and any other object. For Aristotle, the work of art, he thinks, completes what nature begins. I don't think Heidegger would take it that far, but form in the granite is just simply a prior distribution of the matter. It just happens this way, right? Obviously not in a block the way we're pictured here, right? This was probably cut from a larger, less shapely block, but it happened this way, right? Whereas when we look at an axe or a jug or something like this, he says, is determined let me find this place I'm looking for. The form determines the arrangement of the matter, right? So when I make an axe or a jug, I arrange the matter in such a way because I want it to hold water if it's a jug, or I want it to slice through wood if it's an axe, right? As he puts it, even more, it prescribes in each case the kind and the selection of the matter. Impermeable for a jug, right? I wouldn't use a net to make a jug with. The water would just run through it, right? Sufficiently hard for an axe. Firm yet flexible for shoes. The interfusion of form and matter prevailing here is, moreover, controlled beforehand by the purposes served by the jug, the axe, the shoes. Such usefulness is never assigned or added on afterward to a being of the type of a jug, axe, or pair of shoes. But neither is it something that just floats somewhere above it as an end, right? So he thinks, though, again, this matter form schema that we're working with, this third interpretation of the thing, is essential to what we call equipment, right? So when he asked this question, where does this interpretation of the matter form schema have its origin? What direct experience do we have that we're drawing this from, right? Where does this conceptual framework arise in our experience? Not from our experience of things, as just mere things, but really as equipment, right? It's derived from this understanding of things as useful. He says usefulness is the basic feature from which this entity regards us, that is, flashes at us, and is thereby present, and thus is this entity. Both the formative act and the choice of material, a choice given with the act, and therewith the dominance of the conjunction of matter and form, are all grounded in such usefulness. A being that falls under usefulness is always the product of a process of making. It is made as a piece of equipment for something. As determinations of beings, accordingly, matter and form have their proper place in the essential nature of equipment. This name designates what is produced expressly for employment and use, what he'll call these use objects in other contexts. Matter and form are in no case original determinations of the thingness of the mere thing. So again, right, when we talk about the thingness of the thing, this third interpretation seems to take, Heidegger's saying, seems to take as its example particular things, namely equipment that are used or use objects. And so it's too narrow, right? It's too narrow. Maybe other one, in some sense it's very broad. It can be applied to other things, but it's a misapplication. It's a misapplication. It's properly applied to what he's calling equipment here, but it doesn't designate, what we call a work of art or a mere thing. So for him, artworks resemble, in a certain sense, a mere thing more than pieces of equipment. Even though he doesn't want to say that art is a mere thing, okay, right? You don't use art the way you use a pair of shoes. A pair of shoes might be aesthetic, it might look nice the way a work of art looks nice, but if you're using the shoes actually to function, to walk around in, okay, then that says you're looking at them as a piece of equipment, okay? They're being used, but a work of art is not used. You don't look at a painting in a museum to use it for something the way you use a spoon. So in a certain sense, the work of art resembles the hunk of granite, the clunk of the lump of mud, in a certain sense, more than it does a piece of equipment. So a piece of equipment, a pair of shoes, for instance, when finished, is also self-contained like the mere thing, but it does not have the character of having taken shape by itself like the granite boulder, right? So someone had to make the shoes. In a certain sense, that's how they're similar. Works of art are like shoes in that they're both made, right? Equipment displays an affinity with the artwork insofar as it is something produced by the human hand. However, by its self-sufficient presence, the work of art is similar rather to the mere thing, which is taken shape by itself and is self-contained. Nevertheless, we do not count such works among mere things. So works of art aren't mere things, but they have a similarity to mere things in that they just are there. They're not for use. Equipment is somewhere in between, right? It occupies this curious space, as he puts it, between a mere thing and a work of art. As a rule, it is the use objects around us that are the nearest and authentic things. Thus, the piece of equipment is half thing, because characterized by thingliness, and yet it is something more. At the same time, it is half artwork, and yet something less, because lacking the self-sufficiency of the artwork. Equipment has a peculiar position intermediate between thing and work, assuming that such a calculated ordering of them is permissible. Because equipment takes an intermediate place between mere thing and work, the suggestion is that non-equipmental beings, things and works, and ultimately everything that is, are to be comprehended with the help of the being of equipment. In other words, the matter form structure, the third interpretation of thingness. And even we get some support from this, Heidegger argues, in Western theology, right? So the fact that we use equipment so much, and it's sort of this middle ground between works of art and just a block of granite, this sort of makes it appeal to us as an explanatory mode with which we can understand other things and their thingness. And again, he says even Western theology supports this subject-object conception of the thing. He argues that it essentially sees everything as equipment. This is a pretty controversial stance he's making here, right? How does he argue for this, though? I'll get to the quote here in a minute, right? Well, the short answer, Western theology, it does this by, it represents the totality of beings, right? The cosmos, the world, the universe, as created, right? Just like a piece of equipment is created. It's made by some artist or artifice, right? Aristotle does this. You can get this all the way. Well, not to be fair to Aristotle, no. Plato does this. Aristotle's God, I think, is a lot less active than this, okay? But Western theology, what he's calling the biblical faith, definitely takes on this mode of interpretation. So he writes, the inclination to treat the matter form structure as the constitution of every entity receives a yet additional impulse from the fact that on the basis of a religious faith, namely the biblical faith, the totality of all beings is represented in advance as something created, which here means made. So what happens to equipment, when we can't use it anymore? Then we see it as a mere thing. And in this context, what we mean by mere thing is we no longer can use it for anything. So thingliness is just uselessness in this interpretation. So the situation stands revealed as soon as we speak of things in the strict sense as mere things. The mere, after all, means the removal of the character of usefulness and of being made. The mere thing is a sort of equipment, albeit equipment denuded of its equipmental being. The thing being consists in what is then left over. But this remnant is not actually defined in its ontological character. So we're not really getting at the true being. What does it really mean to be a mere thing? Okay, we're just seeing it as something that was formerly useful and is now no longer useful. Right now, it's gone back to maybe just being raw material, if even that, maybe just junk. So this third mode of interpretation of the thing, that which follows the lead of the matter form structure, also turns out to be an assault upon the thing. So what is left of this thingness of equipment once it loses its usability? He does not think that we can determine that under these three interpretations that we have so far of the thing. So what's he going to do? How's he going to solve this? We better stop the video here because this is going a lot longer than I planned already. But we'll go ahead and recap. The next video will recap these three interpretations of the thing. We'll talk about how they're sort of faulty. And then we're going to actually get into a deeper analysis of equipment because he thinks that this has kind of taken over our conception of thingness. It doesn't fit into that version of thingness that sort of fits that structure, that matter form structure, that of equipmental totality, then we sort of disregard it, right? And he's got his sort of critique about this. So he's going to try to get around these obstacles and start to get to the equipmental character of equipment and the thingly character of things, and finally the work character of the work. And then we'll talk more about art. We're actually going to get into the art stuff pretty quick in the next video, so stick around for that. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this one. I know it was a rough lecture. The next one will be so abstract, I think. It's probably one of the more clearer passages from the essay. So again, thanks for sticking around, and I hope to see you on the other side.